In Chapter 8, we talk about process costing and how to account for those costs for units that are not fully complete, along with those units that are completed and transferred out. To be honest with you, it took me a while to get through this chapter, and I know how to do this. So I'm going to try to explain things a little bit differently from how the book shows it, in hopes that maybe you can pick one way to do and it makes more sense. So I'm going to walk you through just some quick examples, walk you through the process, give you some examples, show you a couple ways to do some of the items, and hopefully it will make more sense. So for process costing, to account for these costs, we're going to do this in both the weighted average process costing method and first in, first out process costing method. These steps do not change whether we do weighted average or first in, first out. So make sure you know these 5 steps in order. It's going to be helpful for you. I'm going to first go through the weighted average approach. Step 1 is to find those physical flow of those resources. How can we account for the units? The units themselves, the number of units are not going to change, so that's always a good thing to kind of go back to make sure that we've accounted for everything. So that physical flow of units, we're always going to start with our beginning inventory. We're going to add in any transfers in or units added to the process. That's going to, sometimes we call this transfer in, or units added. We're going to then know that that equals anything that we transfer out plus our ending inventory. This is going to be helpful just to kind of keep track of all those units. You can always come back to this. The second step in this process is then to compute the equivalent units. Again, we're talking about the weighted average approach here. In the units category, those transferred out units are complete, and that's why they're transferred. So this is going to be that total number. That's not going to be any different under materials or conversion costs. That total, the same total, is going to go straight across. Now that ending inventory, we're going to have our ending inventory total that we're going to account for. But now materials and conversion costs, this is where we're looking at those units that are not 100% complete because they're still in our ending inventory. So we're going to take our ending inventory and multiply that by my percent complete. And then the same thing here for conversion. But because these are done at different times, my percent complete for materials might be different than my percent complete for conversion. We're going to then come down and add these together. Let me switch this up. We're going to add this together, and that's going to give us our materials equivalent units, or our conversion equivalent units. I'm going to use these abbreviations because I write too big, so hopefully that will help you. And we'll come back to these numbers because we're going to look at that and use it in some of the other steps. We want to make sure we account for all of our costs in step 3. You're going to include your beginning inventory costs, then any costs added during that current period. So these are your current costs. And this will give you your total cost. Step 4 then is to find out what is that cost per equivalent unit. We're going to add in, just like we did before, find that total cost, but they might be different for materials and conversion. Whereas step 3, we're just identifying all of those costs to be accounted for so that we can kind of trace back to this. Step 4, we're really pulling that apart. So we're going to take our beginning inventory materials cost, our beginning inventory conversion cost, add that to the materials added, whatever added conversion costs we have, and we're going to get a total materials cost. And then we're going to do the same thing and say this is our total conversion cost. Once we have those totals, we're going to come back up to step 2 here, and we're going to bring down those equivalent units that we calculated, and we're going to then take our materials equivalent unit and our conversion equivalent unit, and we're going to find that cost per equivalent unit for both materials and conversion from just by taking the total material cost, divide that by my equivalent units for materials, and I cut my cost per equivalent unit for materials. And then the same thing for my conversion. And then finally we can assign our costs. We're going to assign them to 2 different sections because of how our costs are broken apart. We're going to take those we're looking at our transfer out units first. So we're going to go back to step 2, which was all the way up here. We're going to take that total transferred out for materials and conversion, and again it's going to be the same number. This will be the same number. I'm going to take that cost per equivalent unit that I just determined for each one of these, bring that down, this is my cost per conversion equivalent unit, and now I'm going to find my total. This is my total transferred out. So here I'm going to just multiply this down, and get my total. This should be your total transferred out amount. For materials, my total transfer out amount for conversion. I can add those together to get that total transferred out, because that's typically what they want. Then we'll look at the work in process, the equivalent units. We're going to again from step 2, but we're looking at that ending inventory. So I can go up to step 2, show you where we're going to pull that from. That's going to be coming from here. So those numbers that you came up with over there, we're going to bring down and put those here. So we're going to look at our ending inventory for materials times that percentage. This is coming from step 2. Same thing here, ending inventory for conversion times that percentage, coming from step 2 that we figured out. We're then again going to take that cost per equivalent unit. Those don't change. We're going to multiply. And then we're going to get our total. And this is our total work in process amount for materials, our total work in process amount for conversion. Again, we're probably going to want to add those together, find that total for work in process. Maybe they're going to ask for a total materials amount or a total conversion amount. We can add those together and figure that out. That's the easy one. Let's take another look at how we can do this under first in, first out approach. Again, those steps are going to be the same, except in the first in, first out approach, we're accounting for that beginning inventory separately because we know that some of that beginning inventory cost was actually done in the current period. So we're going to start off the same. We're going to take our beginning inventory, look at what we transferred in or what was added into production. This is going to equal our transferred out plus our ending inventory. That part doesn't stay the same, but what we're really concerned with is how much have we done in the current period. So to figure out how much we've done in the current period, we're going to take our transferred out amount. That's how much I was completely done, completed and transferred. We're going to subtract out that beginning inventory coming from right here. And that's going to equal how much was actually started and completed only during this period. And that's going to be helpful to figure out how to do some of these more in-depth problems. So to compute those equivalent units using the first in, first out method, we're going to take the beginning inventory total and we're going to break it apart again between materials and conversion. But here we're going to take our beginning inventory and we're going to multiply it by 100% minus that percent complete. Because what we really want to know is how much did we do this period. Same thing for conversion. And subtract by that percent complete. Because we really want to know how much was done only during this period. Then we're going to look and find that started and completed. These are whole units. So we're going to just bring that number down. This is my started and completed. And it's the same number for materials and conversion cost. Then my ending inventory work in process, I take that ending inventory total and then I'm going to times it by the percent complete because that tells me how much I've done just this period. Same thing for the conversion cost. Then I'll add all those together and finally come up with my materials equivalent unit and my conversion equivalent unit. We're going to still account for those costs. Let's switch back. Those costs, you're going to look at your beginning inventory costs. We're going to add our current cost to get our total cost. So we know that we make sure we come back to this number and we've accounted for everything. But first in, first out really breaks apart these costs, and I'll show you how they do that. So first thing we're going to do that's different is we're going to bring in only those current costs into our cost per equivalent unit. So we'll look at only the current cost. for materials, our current cost for conversion. Then we're going to look back to step 2, which is right here, and we're going to bring down that cost, that materials equivalent unit and conversion equivalent unit. We're going to divide these numbers to get my materials cost per equivalent unit and our conversion cost per equivalent unit. Now I can come down to step 5. In step 5, we again are doing exactly like we did for the weighted average, but this time we're breaking apart that beginning inventory piece to make sure we account for those costs that were added just during this period. So we'll bring in those beginning inventory costs. But now we're going to see what other costs were added just from this process. So we'll take that beginning inventory materials equivalent unit piece and our beginning inventory conversion equivalent unit piece. Not the total, but we're looking at the beginning inventory. Whoops, not what I meant to do. So one thing you need to note is that that's just the beginning inventory. Then we're going to bring down that cost per equivalent unit that we just did. And we're going to multiply that out to get just the piece of the current beginning inventory costs that were incurred from the beginning inventory. So current costs incurred from our beginning inventory. We would add together the beginning inventory costs and those current costs to get that total beginning inventory cost for materials and that total beginning inventory cost for conversion. We're going to do basically the same thing now for started and completed. We'll find that started and completed number from step 2. Again, these numbers are going to be the same. My cost per equivalent unit going to be the same. We'll just multiply that out to find that total. And then typically, once we've got that part done, we're getting to be pros at this, and we're going to just do it again. We're going to take our equivalent unit from our ending inventory and our ending inventory conversion equivalent unit, bring down that cost per equivalent unit, multiply, find that total. And again, they're going to want you to add some of these pieces together to get the total transferred out cost and that ending inventory cost. When I look at the total transfer out cost, anything that was transferred out was what I started with and what was started and completed. This is my transfer out. So that's a lot. And when you're just talking and telling words, it's kind of difficult to do. So I want to walk you through one of these problems and show you how we can apply numbers to this and then it's not that scary. So these are the problems I'm going to walk through with you. You can do these for practice to just kind of make sure you understand what you're going to do and make sure you have it right. So here's our situation. You might want to write down some of these numbers. I had to because as you'll see, this is a really long problem and it's hard to keep it all on one screen. So I'm going to come down here, and when I have a template for you like this that's available to you in Blackboard, I just find it easier to have something to lay out everything with. So hopefully that's helpful for you too. So beginning balance, I can scroll up and down. Beginning balance was 600. It told me that I started 4,000 units. That's right there. So that means I have to account for 4,600 units. Just as a reminder, we're looking at weighted average first. Now the completed and transferred out, I know I need to account for 4,600. I want to know how much was completed and transferred. They tell me my ending inventory was 1,200. Right there. So that means I can take A minus B and get to my completed and transferred out number, which is 3,400. Now what I want to do is find those equivalent units. So my completed and transferred out number I'm just going to bring down. And since those are whole numbers, that doesn't change. The materials piece, now we're looking, this is my ending inventory. I have 1,200 units in ending inventory, and it tells me, if I come up here, that it's 40% complete to materials, 20% complete to conversion. You'll notice beginning inventory is not used in weighted average, and that's the percentages. Beginning inventory percentages are not used in weighted average. So we're looking at 40% and 20%. So I just multiply those two to look at how much work I've completed just during this period. Then I'm going to add those together to get my equivalent units. Step 3 is trying to figure out all those costs that went into this. This is all just given to me. I'm just bringing it down from the problem. You can also find this problem right in your book. I'm using those numbers from the book. 12,416, if I add that together, and 6,916. Then I'm going to take those equivalent units down from step 2, 3880, 3640. I'm going to divide that to get my cost per equivalent unit of 3.2 and 1.9. Now I want to make sure I've accounted for everything. So I'm going to go back, look at step 3, find those total costs. If I add these together, 19,332. So that's the number I'm trying to get to, but I want to break it apart. So I want to look at how much was assigned to my completed and transferred units. So I'm going to go back up here, find my completed and transferred out amount, and bring those numbers down. I'm going to multiply that by my cost per equivalent unit that I just determined. Actually, not coming from there, coming from that last line, just so we're not confused. And that cost, that's what I think, per equivalent unit is $3.20, $1.90. This is where I'm confusing myself. I just put them in the wrong little slot. This is just a title, that first line. So that's how your book labels it out. I'm going to multiply this out, and I will get, let's see, I took 3,400. This equals 10,880. and 64.60 for a total of 17,340. And then I look at my ending inventory. I'm going to bring in those equivalent units, again coming from these numbers here. The cost per equivalent unit doesn't change, $3.20 or $1.90. And then finally multiply that out, and I get 1536 and 456. If I add those together, 1992. And if I add these two together, 19,332. So when I do that cost reconciliation, I'm just making sure these two numbers agree, and they do. So that's your weighted average. Let's look at the first in, first out now. This one, some of these numbers aren't going to change, so we'll be a little bit easier. Your beginning balance still 600. Started into production still 4,000. That equals 4,600. But you notice the second piece of this is kind of expanded. We know this number. We know this number. Let's put in what we know. We know our ending inventory. They give that to us. So I'm going to start with this. I knew that number, knew this number, knew that number. To get this number, I'm going to take 2 minus 3. So I know my transfer out number is 3,400. Which means I also know that my started and completed must be 2,800. Because I know that 4 minus 1 has to fill that spot. This is also where that beginning inventory plus that's what was started, which is what we're starting with there. We know that that has to equal my transferred out plus my ending inventory. That's step 1 of the process. If I know my ending inventory is 1,200, this one must be 3,400. All right, let's look at those equivalent units, because now we're splitting this into 3 different pieces. I'm going to fill in the easy part first. My started and completed. I just figured out that number. Those are whole units. Just going to put those in. My beginning inventory balance is 600. It told me in the problem that the materials were 60% complete. Conversion was 53% complete. Now it's 1 minus 60% because I want to know how much more I have to do. So this is going to come to 240, or 600 times 40%. My beginning balance for my conversion equivalent units is 282, or 600 times 40, whoops, not point, 47%. Because I want to know how much did I do this period versus my ending inventory, which was at 1,200 units. And we're still at 40% and 20%. My ending inventory, I don't subtract out, I just multiply. I'm only looking at how much I did that period, so that doesn't change. And then I'm going to add all those together. All right, so now we're looking at determining that total production cost. To get to that total production cost, we want to make sure we're just accounting for all of our costs first. So that part's not changing. This is coming straight from the problem. again, not any different than what we just did. But here, when we're calculating our cost per equivalent unit, we're only looking at those current costs. We want to know what was done this period. So I'm only bringing in those current costs. Then I'm going to bring in my cost per equivalent unit. I realize I forgot a 2 over there. And I'm going to divide those to get my cost per equivalent unit, which is $3.25 versus $2. Now we're going to go through and assign those costs. All right, so let me pick up where I left off. We had those total costs. I had to go in and re-download because the last page did not come through, and I want to make sure that you get all of this for the FIFO cost reconciliation, because this part is kind of the hard part. So I want to make sure you have something to follow. So we have those total costs. Now we're going to break those down and make sure that we can pull them in from what goes to the beginning balance, what goes to the started and completed part, and what goes to ending inventory. So we have those costs assigned to the beginning inventory. They were $976 and $272. Then we're going to look at, that total is $1248. Then we're going to look at the beginning inventory work in process equivalent units. That's taken back from step 2. And then we're going to pull in that cost per equivalent unit that we just figured out in step 4. And multiply these two out. That's 780 and 564. We'll add these together to get a total of 1344. So if we wanted costs associated with that beginning inventory, it'd be $25.92. Now moving to that started and completed portion. Remember, those are whole units. We're just going to bring it down those numbers again for the cost per equivalent unit and multiply. And find that total. And then finally, that cost assigned to that ending inventory. We'll bring in those equivalent units from step 2. That cost per equivalent unit. Multiply those out. We can add them together to get that total. And just to make sure we did it all right, we're going to add each of these 4 numbers together. Make sure they equal that 19,332 with what we started with. So hopefully you can see the differences between the weighted average and the FIFO. Hopefully this gives you a good example. Again, this template is available in Blackboard if it's helpful. Otherwise,